Baby, I can't get over it. You're looking good on a Wednesday night. Wilson Alexander from The Advocate joins us. What's going on, man? How are we doing tonight, Wilson?
Doing well, Blake. I appreciate the compliments as always about my hair.
I know
I'm glad it looks good.
I know it gets old, but as a guy who's getting older, like, look at these grays in the beard. I got gray in the hair. It's just not like it used to. So enjoy it, my man. That's all I got to say.
Absolutely. I mean, hey, I think probably most people's family has some baldness in it, and mine's no different. And so I've always said this about it: I don't care what color it turns into, as long as it's there.
It stays. No doubt. All right, Wilson, we got a lot to get into with you because, I mean, look, you broke the story today about the scheduling of 2024. Now, look, I'm going to kind of give you the floor because, look, I don't necessarily understand how this process works, right? Like, I know that you got USC, UCLA. Is LSU about to play 2024? Are they going to play USC and UCLA? Like, what have you found out? What do you know about this scheduling so far?
So that would be the case as things stand right now. LSU, the day after Texas and Oklahoma were cleared to join the SEC earlier than originally planned in 2024, LSU and Rice signed a new contract that pushed their game that was scheduled for 2024 to 2029. So that means that LSU now only has 3 non-conference opponents scheduled in 2024, which clears the runway further if the SEC goes to a 9-game conference schedule, which has not been set yet. It's still up for debate between the 9-game and the 8-game, and we'll know a lot more on that front later this spring. But if it does go to 9 games, LSU has the 3 non-conference opponents set, and those would be USC, UCLA, and South Alabama. Now, that can still change between now and then. Schedules are probably a little bit more fluid these days than they, I think, really have been just because of conference realignment and those sorts of factors. But that is what the case is now. So LSU would open the season against USC. We saw the announcement today about the official game time, which I think further shows that that game is not going to move around. The first one with USC in the Big Ten will be against LSU in Las Vegas in Allegiant Stadium there September 1st. But then, like 2 weeks later, right now, LSU is still, as of now, scheduled to host UCLA in Tiger Stadium, and then we'll have South Alabama. And so the SEC ends up doing an 8-game schedule. LSU could always add somebody back for that 4th non-conference game. But it clears the runway for LSU to be able to accommodate 9.
What does your gut tell you? Do you really think that they're going to play? I mean, because, Wilson, look, I mean, I don't mean this in a wrong way, but let's just say hypothetically they go to the SEC goes to a 9-game conference schedule. That's 10 Power 5 opponents. And let's not – look, we can say whatever we want to about the Pac-12, but UCLA and USC aren't chumps. You just lost to one of them a couple of seasons ago when Ed Orgeron was the coach. I know we all know what happened there. What's your gut tell you about? Are they really going to do that and play 10 conference games? Like, what do you feel?
Well, it would actually be it'd be 11 Power 5 opponents.
Oh,
just the one. It would be 11 Power 5 opponents and one non Power 5 opponent in South Alabama. It would be quite easily the toughest schedule in the country, not knowing everything else that's around, who else that people have on the docket. But yeah, to play USC and UCLA in the same month in the 9 SEC games would be tough. Now, what my gut tells me that at this point I really just don't know, because they've had this on the schedule like this now for since September 2021 when they scheduled the USC game, and the UCLA game in that time has not moved. And they've had time to potentially do that. Maybe those conversations have happened. I don't know. But at this point, it's still on there. And there's been some time to move it. And the one that they moved wasn't UCLA yet. It was Rice. And so that can still all change. There's a long way to go in this. But as of now, that's where we stand.
That's insane, though, Wilson. Like, if you really just, sit there and think about 11 Power 5 opponents, and if let's just say, for argument's sake, USC and UCLA are ranked, which they may just be, there's a scenario not only of the 11 Power 5 opponents, you could be in a situation where you're facing 8 ranked opponents. Okay. Hey, welcome to being a star at Garrett Nussmeier. How about that?
It would. And this is also, of course, you have to consider that this is in 2024, the first year of a 12-team college football playoff. You could make, I think, arguments for and against whether or not that actually helps LSU in reaching that expanded field if you've played such a difficult schedule, maybe if you have 2 or 3 losses, but you've been able to point to playing USC and UCLA and a 9-game SEC schedule, then maybe you have a really strong argument for getting in as an at-large team at number 12 or 11 if you were to have a couple losses. Or, if you end up going like 11-1 in that stretch, then you're definitely a top 4 seed, especially because you'd be playing for an SEC title, and you'd have probably have if you're not one of the 4, who obviously get an automatic bye in the first round as a conference champion, then you're an at-large hosting in that. So it's really tough, but there are some advantages possibly to it because of the expanded college football playoff that year.
It's a really good point. Really good point. Because, if you think about it, LSU had 2 losses going into A&M. Now, what if their 2 losses would have been in a scenario where you play 9 ranked opponents, right? Like that would have been insane. That's a really good point. I didn't think about that. That's why they pay you the big bucks. Wilson Alexander from The Advocate joins us. Wilson, we are obviously out of practice last week. I'll just give you the floor here. I was kind of blown away by how big Omar Spates, a linebacker from Oregon State, was. He moved fluently. I mean, obviously, he had just been here before, in a sense. Like, this isn't my first spring practice. What are some of the things that kind of took you back and like, man, I mean, obviously the sharpness of the practice from the first time Brian Kelly stepped out at LSU, but is there any player or scenario that you thought, and I know it was a short amount of time, that stood out to you last week?
Well, I guess, as you said, I think a precursor to anything that we say about it was that it was a very short period of time, right. Non-contact, no pads. We were there for 20 minutes on the first day. And so it's hard to glean too much. To back up your point, Omar certainly looks the part, which you would expect because he's been in college now for 4 years at Oregon State and been a starter. You would expect that to be the case. I also thought that J.K. Johnson looked physically impressive, especially looking back at some pictures that our photographers have taken later. He's jacked at cornerback over there. And, having been at Ohio State for a little bit, he certainly looks the part. of Javian Toviano looks like he's got some great size, which you knew coming in, but then you actually to see it out there. It'll be really interesting to see kind of how he does at corner. And he kind of just his future at LSU as that unfolds. Some of the things that stood out to me, a name that I feel like people haven't really talked about a lot, and again, this is just 20 minutes of individual drills, but is Ovi Agofu. Right. Because, he was the first person up in Jack linebacker drills. Brian Kelly mentioned him during the press conference Thursday. He also mentioned him to me in a conversation we had, the interview I had with Coach Kelly last week before spring practice opened, talking about some of those newcomers. He's mentioned Ovi's name a couple times now, and you heard people that were pretty high on how he did during winter workouts, because he's an experienced player. He might not, really be quite the edge rusher that B.J. Ojulari is, but he's been around college for a while. He's been pretty productive. And I feel like Brian Kelly seems pretty high on him. And he seems just maybe kind of like the early leader to replace B.J. Ojulari at edge rusher, although there's quite a long way to go between now and the season opener.
To stay on that same point of guys that were taking like those first reps, surprised that Javian Toviano was running with the first team corners?
Not too much. Brian Kelly hinted that actually, again, when we talked on last Tuesday, he's like, there's some freshmen who you're going to be really impressed by. When you go out there and watch, you're going to say those guys can probably play early. And I think he was hinting at Toviano. Like you said, we saw him sort of get a little bit of run with the first team. Those corners are going to rotate, though, a ton throughout the spring. And LSU can't even get a full picture of that cornerback room until Deuce Chestnut is healthy again and a full participant, which won't be – he's out for the spring. That won't really be until preseason camp. So, but no, it didn't shock me. I mean, he's a top 100, top 50, I think, actually, recruit in this last class. A really big get for LSU there at cornerback, and he's going to have a chance to get on the field early.
Wilson Alexander from The Advocate joined us. Now, Wilson, you had the exclusive for Brian Kelly. What did you – look, I don't know if you get giddy like I do, but I have – like if I ever go into an interview, I have one question I want answered. And everything else is just lanyard, right? I don't know if you're like me. You're probably not. But is there one thing in your exclusive with Brian Kelly you walked away with like, yep, they're going to be good? Like, did you have any of that? Or like, yeah, like that's something I didn't know, but it's speculated. What was something that you took away the most from your exclusive with Brian Kelly? Which, by the way, go read and go listen.
Thanks for the plug there. But the thing that I learned – the most about was this change at special teams and how they're going to redo that. And I know special teams isn't the first thing that people think about It's usually you want to be able to just overlook it, but it was because it was such a glaring issue last year. And really the only change that LSU made this whole offseason was with the biggest news was with the change of the special teams, leadership with Brian Polian moving off the field and John Jancic becoming the special teams coordinator and outside linebackers coach. That was the thing I wanted to learn about the most. And we got to talk about that a good bit. And what I learned was this, that, what Brian Kelly is calling it a, quote, decentralized operation for how LSU is going to run special teams.
What does that even mean? To really interrupt, what does that even mean?
Well, Jancic is the special teams coordinator in title, and he obviously has a role in special teams, but it's not just him overseeing every little facet of the operation and like leading, during special teams periods in practice. It's not just him directing the entire thing. Brad Davis and Mike Denbrock are heavily involved on PAT and field goals. Brad, being the offensive line coach, with the blocking of PAT and field goal. Matt House is involved in kickoff, and Kerry Cooks and Robert Steeples on punt. And so it's really a collaborative approach this time, instead of having just one voice at the top in Brian Polian, who's in charge of it all. There's a lot of sort of different hands going on. And really in behind the scenes, I think it's important to note is that Lester Erb, who's the special teams analyst, is a big piece of this as well. He's kind of the one who draws up the schemes on special teams. And Brian Kelly, when he looked back and watched the film, really liked schematically what LSU did on special teams, and he wanted to keep that intact. So Lester Erb has a big piece in this, but really it's just sort of a lot of people helping out on special teams. And it's a big change from what LSU had going on a year ago, as it tries to correct a lot of the issues that were on that unit.
Wilson, are you surprised with Bob Diaco? I know that you had reported this and broke this news about Bob Diaco being just a defensive analyst. Are you surprised around not just LSU but college football? Like when I think of an analyst, okay, at least from 5 years ago, or at least under Orgeron or Nick Saban to some extent. Now Nick always had like that one massive analyst that they paid like $1 million to, like a Charlie Strong or whatever. But LSU has a crap load of analysts that are just like Bob Diaco, a former head coach at UConn, defensive coordinator. Like I get blown away by that kind of stuff. Like this dude literally has been a head coach in a DC and was a DC in the national title game. Are you like does that blow your mind that LSU has just done that well from even just an analyst role perspective?
Not anymore, because this is the way college football has been going. I mean, Saban, right, I think, really popularized it, and Georgia does the same thing with Kirby Smart. I mean, gosh, before he promoted it, like Will Muschamp was an analyst. Their new offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, came back to Georgia as an analyst for a year, and then when they had that opening because Todd Monken left for the Ravens, they promoted him. It's kind of what you see a lot of times now, especially for coaches who may be kind of down in their careers. Alabama brought back the former head coach at Tennessee, whose name is suddenly slipping my mind, Butch Jones.
Yeah, Butch Jones, yeah.
Yes, thank you. I mean, he was an analyst there, and he was the head coach of Tennessee for multiple years. It's what you see these days, especially at programs in the like LSU and Alabama and the rest that are these sort of premier college football teams. And so LSU, has had that for sort of been trending in that direction in terms of the size of its analyst department for a while, dating back to the Orgeron era, and had some important people like that as on staff as analysts, and Kelly has continued that. I mean, John Jancic, who we were just talking about as the new special teams coordinator, he was a multiple-time defensive coordinator, and he hadn't been a DC in a second. He was working at Georgia before that for a couple of years as an analyst, but he came over to LSU because of his connections with Kelly, and now LSU promotes him up. But that's a guy with a ton of experience just as an analyst staff, and it's what you see nowadays.
Yeah, I just even now, Wilson, it just like when people talk about money and all this kind of stuff. Oh, this, could we talk about money and conference realignment? Well, yeah, if I'm the coach at Texas Tech and a 4-time Bros finalist is your analyst, yeah, I might want a little bit more money. Okay, like that just blows me away. All right, last one for you, Wilson. We'll get you out of here. Thank you so much for joining us. How big is this USC thing, this USC game being finalized? I mean, it will be the third Sunday game for LSU in a row, but for me, it feels like this is bigger than LSU versus Florida State. This is like creme de la creme. I mean, you got two teams that have won multiple national titles in 20 years. this is just a massive thing for LSU. And not only that, I mean, they're going to be in Vegas, baby. We're going to Caesar. And I don't know if Caesar still lives in that palace, but we're going to go and find out.
Oh my gosh, LSU fans taking over Las Vegas is just going to be a sight. It's going to be, I mean, Las Vegas is used to, I mean, it's Las Vegas. I don't think I have to explain that, but like just putting LSU fans in there and the way that everybody travels and all that, I don't know if Vegas is even ready for that level of like what it's going to be like. I'm sure it is because it probably does it every weekend, but no, it's a huge, huge game to answer your question. It's interesting, and it differs from Florida State, and the fact that it's just like kind of a one-off instead of Florida State being the home-and-home series. So you had to build toward the anticipation of just one single game with these two teams that haven't played since 1984, only twice all time, and they split those games. And it's there's a lot of great storylines. I mean, obviously, sort of Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly being hired at the same time, right around the same time, in these two different places, and everybody kind of knows that backstory with the LSU search, and also, USC's not going to have Caleb Williams at that point anymore, assuming he, declares early, but they're still going to be talented with Lincoln Riley, whoever he has at quarterback. And so I just think it sort of has this name brand with USC being also all the way across the country. You don't feel as close to them, so it sort of feels a little bit more special maybe, even though it's not like LSU plays Florida State all the time. You kind of have some different dynamics going on that really build up to a lot of anticipation for this game, even though we've still got an entire football season between now and then.
Well, what's crazy is I thought the same thing. I was like, can LSU faithful outdrink Vegas? Like, would that be a national headline? Breaking: LSU fans dries out Vegas. Like, would the mafia come out and like start whacking people? Like how would that go? If they drank all that, maybe, I mean, they'll be 50 rich. Who knows? But that would be really interesting. I lied. Last one, Wilson. I had a buddy bring this up to me. We work together. Obviously, we do the stuff at XM. And he told me, he's like, Blake, the SEC and the Big Ten absolutely want this game no matter what. And he was talking about, could you imagine both teams in a conference realignment? I mean, LSU's not in the realignment, but obviously with SEC having realigned, and then USC going to the Big Ten. This is exactly what ESPN wants, right? Like, I mean, there's no better way to kick off a realignment than LSU and USC. And it's interesting that it's those two. I guess, like, when we talk about all this conference realignment, do you think that this was somewhat planned? So this ultimate question was, do you think that the ESPN kind of planned this out to get this kicked off? And I didn't even really think about that. It didn't ever really cross my mind. What do you think about that question?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I hadn't considered that really at all, to be frank. I don't. Me either. I hadn't thought about, the TV networks certainly, play a hand in a lot of things at times. We've seen that during conference realignment, reports of Fox sort of being involved with different negotiations and stuff like that. But I don't know. I would have to ask around to try to get you a better answer. I don't know what the ESPN network's involvement was in the planning of this game at all. But I certainly know this. I mean, it is a great matchup to start 2024, the year that college football undergoes so much change with multiple, Big Ten and SEC expansion, college football playoff expansion, USC's first big game in the Big Ten. It's a great way to start off all that and gives you lots to talk about on television.
I love it. You're the man. Continue to, you're on a heater. You can't get off the heater. Stay on the breaking